Welcome home. We are WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and Baltimore Positive. We're positively into the 4th of July week. We're having fun around here. We're getting the Maryland Crab Cake Tour back out on the road on the 12th of July. We will be at Fadley's before the Yankees and the Orioles get together. Come on down to the new Lexington Market, have a crab cake, have some shrimp salad. If you're going down to one of the games this week, make sure you stop by, get a beer at Fadley's. It is worth the effort and certainly worth the hype as well if you do that. Our friends at Jiffy Lube Multi-Care sending us out on the road along with Liberty Pure Solutions, keeping our water crystal clear on the Maryland Crab Cake Tour. I have loved the Orioles' resurgence in a lot of ways. I just did a segment holding up all my old Louis Aparicio baseball cards and talking about baseball and knowledge of baseball and history of baseball. There was such a long period and a drought here where we didn't talk a lot of baseball in the summer. And I didn't have guests like this on to take a deeper dive into Oriole history. And John Miller's been on recently talking about an Earl Weaver book that he's working on. And there's this John Eisenberg has unearthed these bird tapes with all of these interviews, Harry Dalton being one of them. Harry Dalton dealt my cousin back to the Chicago White Sox. I don't know his role in getting him in here in 63, 64. But Lee Kluck might know that. Lee Kluck has written a book on Harry Dalton, and probably a shame he didn't have access to John Eisenberg's tapes. The Life and Legacy of Baseball Executive Harry Dalton. Leave While the Party is Good is the name of the book. Lee hails from Wisconsin. He is in Stevens Point, up there sort of northeast of Green Bay. I haven't been to Stevens Point. They used to make great beer ads from Stevens Point, Wisconsin in the winter. I welcome in author Lee Kluck and the history of Harry Dalton. Let me guess, you're a Brewers fan, Lee, yeah?
Yep. Born and raised, and have probably be till the day they put me in the ground. So yep, though I'm a practicing historian, so I have a master's degree in history, and I wanted to use my degree, so I thought, hey, best of both worlds. Talk a little base.
You're also a Saber nerd too, like my boy Luke Jones here in the Society of Research as well. I love the history of baseball, right? My last name's Aparicio. I'm here because of baseball. Literally, I make that clear to the Orioles ownership all the time as well, that's the truth. Harry Dalton is a character from my childhood.
Yep.
He was with the Brewers in '82 and Harvey's Wallbangers and all that went on, and beating the Orioles in the Sutton Palmer game in '82. I'm old enough for all of that.
Yep.
But every time he was referenced, and George Bamberger was a part of the Brewers organization and had been a pitching coach here. Palmer still references Bambi all the time. The Brewers took the Oriole way to Milwaukee, and the Oriole way was laid by Harry Dalton and Paul Richards in that era of Oriole baseball. And it's fascinating that you would come to me when I saw Harry Dalton. There's a real Baltimore story here that a guy from upper Wisconsin had to go back and get a part of in order to write a book about Harry Dalton, right?
That's true. Harry was born in Massachusetts, but he always, he had an affinity for Baltimore. Obviously, he had a really successful career with 3 different teams, but his most successful period was in Baltimore. And if, like you say, your cousin had a lot to do with that.
So did Frank Robinson, by the way. Put him in there.
And so you have to tell that story to be able to tell the story of Harry Dalton's career, because the Dalton gang, the nucleus of it came together in Baltimore, and the ideas they put in place were definitely built in Baltimore. So it's been a huge part of what I've tried to do is highlight that period in Orioles history. And I think the book, if you're an Oriole fan, I think the first third of the book especially is going to be a lot of fun for you. I interviewed countless former Orioles, Andy Etchebarren before he passed away, who was the starting catcher for a lot of those years. Don Buford, Pete Rickert, all sorts of different people. I got about 30 seconds with Boog Powell when I was in Baltimore 2 summers ago. Boog told me some good stories. So there are those connections, and we look at him through the lens of Harry Dalton's career because Harry was a lifelong Oriole. He was literally probably the third or fourth person they ever hired, and was on the payroll through the end of the 71 series, um, before he headed out west to California. So it is a very Baltimore series, a very Baltimore centric story. Harry's three daughters were born in Baltimore. His wife went to Goucher College. So they are Baltimore through and through. And I think that comes out in the story too, and you get a good sense of what the city was like back then, but also what the team went through to get to the top of the mountain, like they did at the end of the 70s or the end of the 60s.
Yeah, I mean, the resurgence of the Orioles at this point, the last couple of years, and now new ownership, and obviously these really special players, it's brought back, my baseball card collecting and different parts of the history of my history and my family's history in coming here. What do you know about Harry Dalton and Louis Aparicio? Is there anything in your book in regard to that? Because you mentioned that. I'm not sure. Was he running the team in 63, 64 when Louis came? I don't know that he traded for Louis. I know he traded Louis away.
So Louis and Harry got along really well. I think Louis is the type of guy that gets along with a lot of people, right? I mean, but Harry and Louis did, for what I understand, get along very well. Um, I don't have any direct stories, but what I can tell you is that Harry always valued Louis and what he did for that team, especially in the 66 season. And yeah, Frank Robinson was a huge part of that. And the thing I can remember about the Louis Aparicio tie-in with the Frank Robinson thing is one day in Miami when Frank Robinson takes his first BP, and there's 6 or 8 guys standing around to see what their new GM has brought them. And Frank hits one into the palm trees, and Louis and a bunch of other guys just looked, and I says, "Well, I guess we just won the pennant." And I've removed an expletive from that statement, but um, it I think Harry was in 63, 64. Harry would have been the farm director under Lee McPhail, but Lee bringing over Louis and shoring up the middle of the infield. They had one of the strongest middle infields in baseball, especially in the mid. Um, that 66 team with Ron Hansen and Louis Aparicio and
Brooks.
Brooks Robinson and Andy Etchbarren up the middle, uh, Don Buford. It was one of the better defensive teams in history too, and I think that's the thing people overlook is that for as much thump as they had in that lineup at one point.
Well, Paul Blair, very, very underrated fielder. Right. Yeah.
And so they had really good defense. They had outstanding pitching, but yeah, from what I have gathered, Louis and Harry get along really well.
Well, this was about Belanger. Him getting dealt out was about Belanger. It wasn't about Louis. Had some really good years. He had a really good year in Boston in like 71 later in his career. And then he fell apart. He's 38 years old. But that was a fascinating seed for everything Camden Yards would become and everything the Orioles would become. And Harry Dalton was the middle of it. I mean, that's why when you were offered to me to come on, I'm like, you're going to have some stories about Harry Dalton in the 60s for all of these players that came in and decisions that were made. Dealing Aparicio was a great decision. They 69, 70, 71, they had a farm system that was unbelievable. There was an Oriole way.
Yep. So they really had by that point developed the team that they felt they could get younger. Like you said, Mark Belanger, Harry Dalton told reporters at the time for the Baltimore Sun that there were 2 players that he would never trade. One of them was Mike Epstein, who he had to trade. He was forced to trade through happenstance. Epstein sort of forced his way out of Baltimore when he realized that Boog Powell was probably going to be the first baseman there forever. And the other one is Mark Belanger. So, they did get younger. They moved forward. But yeah, Harry, I mean, Harry, if you think of a major acquisition even prior to Brooks Robinson, or I'm sorry, Frank Robinson, Harry was there. He was the right hand man of a guy by the name of Jim McLaughlin, who was the farm director, the first farm director of the Orioles. And when the papers would ask him, Jim, what do you think about this kid, prospect A? And he would go, I don't know, go ask that kid Dalton. He knows everybody. And he had this cerebral mind. He took in all that information. So when it came time to name a general manager, he was sort of the obvious fit because he had known everybody in the system. He understood sort of what they were trying to do and accomplish and how to teach the people they had. And yeah, he interacted with everybody. I mean, he fought with Brooks Robinson over $50 one time in a contract negotiation. Brooks told me, he said, Harry looked at me and said, well, if you really want this, I'll give you this money, but just remember I gave it to you. He was kind of tight with a buck, but he was also he was one of the first player general managers to players really liked him. Even Boog Powell, who had some tension with Harry over his weight at various points in his career, once threw $5 down when Boog weighed in 1 pound overweight and threw $5 down at Harry's feet and said, "Here, there's your fine." There's those types of things, but the players respected him. They liked him. Don Buford told me that part of the reason they liked Harry so much is that Harry just wanted to win. He didn't care whether people were white or black or Hispanic. It didn't matter as long as you could do the job they thought you could. And so I think, especially in the mid 60s in Baltimore, when it could have very well been a very contentious time, and it was a contentious time in the city, they were one of the more unified locker rooms, and Harry Dalton had a lot to do with that.
Lee Kluck is here. He has a book on Harry Dalton, and you can go out and get a look at it. You'll love the history of baseball. You'll certainly love this one, The Life and Legacy of Baseball Executive Harry Dalton. Leave while the party's good. Lee hails from Wisconsin. I guess that brings us to the next part of the story. Like, familiar with the Dalton part of here, familiar with the Milwaukee part of the Harry Dalton story. Give me 71. They've won a World Series, lost 2 World Series at that point. And the farm system was ripe at that point. We were talking Coggins, Gritch, Baylor were all kind of coming through at that point as well. And that was going to be the next thing that happened. He left. I don't know the circumstances of all that. Clue me in, Lee.
Yep. So on the surface, it seems like a really weird thing to do because the Orioles were at one end of the baseball spectrum and the Angels were at the other. They literally were one of the worst teams in the American League and had been since their advent in 1961. But
they were a doormat, as my old man would say. Yeah,
exactly, the doormat. What you don't know, and what I found really unbelievably eye-opening, was that behind the scenes, while Harry Dalton was not a guy that would publicly seek a lot of praise, in print, or, he just kind of went about his job and did his job. What really sort of bothered him is that people like Frank Cashin, who on paper was his boss, but they were more contemporaries, I would argue. People like Frank Cashin really tried to hem in Harry as far as what his potential was with the Orioles. And at the time, Jerry Hoffberger, the owner, believed in giving 1-year contracts to everyone. So it didn't matter if you were the manager, the general manager, the player, you worked on a 1-year deal. And Harry said, "Hey, I've worked here since 1953, the winter of 53. I've done a lot for this team.
I want stability, right? Literally.
Stability for my family, right? He's got 3 little girls at home. He says, I want stability for my family. I will stay here I love it here. And what you get into is a lot of what they would call paternalism. And Kurt Flood brought this out in his court case that was going on at the same time, where a team would tell, ownership had a tendency to tell players what was best for them in their career. And it turned out that the Orioles were doing a lot of the same stuff to Harry Dalton. And Dalton actually went as far as to say, while Flood was in the court, much like Kurt Flood, he said, I don't know if I want to work in a sport where I can't decide for myself where I want to work, because the Orioles were really saying, well, if you do want to leave here, we're going to make sure that you don't, you've got to take a year off, and we're going to have all these troubles, and we're going to talk to the commissioner.
We're going to make life hard on you.
Yeah, exactly. We're going to talk to the commissioner and all these things. So ultimately, the departure was I think was harmonious after a while. I mean, everybody sort of got over it, but it really was a change from baseball history, because you saw ownership as this monolithic thing, and really it wasn't in the case of Harry Dalton. There was tension even between middle management and
ownership.
And ownership, exactly.
Wow. Lee Kluck teaching me. This is why I got to have nerds on. Saber people. I love them the most, especially when they write books and do history and teach me some history. So Dalton goes out to California and winds up in Milwaukee. Did Gene Autry own the Angels then? Or that was before?
Yeah, well,
he did.
He worked for Gene. And he and Gene, despite the fact that Harry never had a winning season, he and Gene got along very well. Harry would go on and acquire Nolan Ryan in California, and Nolan would become probably the best pitcher of the 1970s.
Well, he had Tanana, Bobby Valentine. You mentioned Epstein. Epstein, he had him there in California as well.
Yep. He traded for Frank Robinson at one point at the end of his career.
That's right. I remember that too.
He had a young Mickey Rivers. They just couldn't quite gel. They couldn't find the right manager for what they were trying to do. And
Bill Rigney, am I right in saying that? Probably in that
was earlier, but they had Bobby Winkles. They had
that's right. Well, great name, Bobby Winkles.
They had Bobby Winkles, who had been the coach at Arizona State. They had Dick Williams, Norm Sherry, a whole host of, he had 5 different managers at one point.
Well, I think 73, 74 Angels, I'm thinking Nolan Ryan and a young Tanana. I went out and saw them play, and Bobby Valentine, he was my favorite player. So those were the good days with the big A on the hat,
Yep. So they didn't score a lot of runs, but they tried, and I think it just didn't work. Now, if you ask Nolan Ryan, he said any winning that they did in California after Harry Dalton was there was due in large part to the things that Harry Dalton had set up. He was one of the first major forays into free agency when he brought Don Baylor and Bobby Grich in the 76-77 window. And in 79, the Angels would win a division title, and in 82 they would win another division title. And
they spent a lot of money then. Gene got uppity. He wanted Carew and Fred Lynn, all those guys, right?
They brought in Buzzy Bavasi, and who decided that the best way was, if they were going to spend money, they were just going to spend a lot. So they brought in Reggie Jackson and all these things. But they did make the pieces that Harry had acquired, made some of those deals and some of the things that would come later possible. And so even though the period in California is sort of a dark period for Dalton professionally, and people go, well, he it's kind of a lost period in his career. It was better off than I think people realize. And then going to Milwaukee, he had this resurgence. He had a lot of fun teams there. They had a lot of home runs. They energized a real blue collar city.
Well, the most important thing is he took over the team that my all-time favorite player, Sisto Lescano, played for Harry. So, Sisto was my dude. And, and I loved Yount and Molitor, like all that. All of that traces to him. Hall of Famers, man.
Yeah. So, he did. And he made a trade with the Cardinals, brought over Pete Vukovich and Rollie Fingers, and would later make a trade for Don Sutton, who helped them in 82.
Yeah. We know about that in Baltimore.
Yeah. I wrote an article on that game actually. It was pretty fun from the
How old
standpoint.
are you, Lee?
I'll be 44 in November.
So you don't have a recollection. See, I'm 55. So that weekend in '82 and those 4 games and that iconic sunset picture on the Friday night twilight doubleheader that was made into a poster. Guy of my age, even 42 years later, Lee remembers that very, very well. The one time the Brewers got over on us. And listen, if from a Baltimore perspective, and this comes from the heart, I was born in '68. I was born into the Aparicio thing during that era and all that. I remember '79, and I had a Pirates fan on this morning, my buddy Seth Elkin from the Maryland Lottery, and he's old enough to remember '79, and I'm old enough to remember '83. You remember the losses, you know what I mean? Like,
Yep.
I'm still mad at the Brewers about '82, and it really
I just
was at that
yeah,
time. It was a bunch of old Oriole guys
yeah.
knocking us out and going to the World Series.
I think I don't. Harry didn't see it this way, but I do call the '82 playoffs for Milwaukee the Harry Dalton reunion tour, sort of the Harry Dalton revenge tour. They would beat Baltimore to get into the playoffs. They would beat California to get into the World Series, and if they had beaten St. Louis, they had made a big trade with St. Louis to sort of cement their team, and just fell a little short because of injury. Um,
Didn't
but
they
it's
win
funny.
like game one, like 15-1 or something in
It
the
was
World Series?
10 nothing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it was like they won one of the early games. You're like, boy, this is going to get steamrolled. They're on fire, and then they don't win. And I'm not rubbing it in. Believe me, I'm not, because I like the people of Wisconsin. I mean, we're starving here. The Brewers never won. So, like, as a fan for you, almost like being an Indians fan or something, or like a Mariners fan, like when you've never won, I feel bad for us. I feel bad, not really for the Pirates fans, but like being a Brewers fan for life has just been about wanting and waiting. And honestly, that '82 thing that's the Valhalla of Brewerdom, right? Literally.
Well, I think that was part of the reason why I wanted to write a book, because I think there is more there than '82. That is the pinnacle for a lot of people. In fact, I would argue that that is probably the pinnacle even for as a franchise. Their institutional memory is rightly so grounded in that '82 period, that period '78 to '82. But part of the thing I wanted to show was is that Harry Dalton did a lot of winning in Milwaukee after he left, or after that World Series period, and in the 10 years prior, 10 years past, um, and extend that out. But I think the interesting story I have on that. So you bring up the '82 series in Baltimore, right? And they have to win one game in 4 days, Milwaukee, to win the AL East, and they dump the first 3 games, so they have to win on Sunday. And everybody in the Milwaukee party is assuming that Harry will be tense and the players will be tense, and
And
Mario Zito.
Earl Weaver's retiring too. Let's put that on top of it.
So everybody's like, oh, okay, Milwaukee's going to be on edge. There's all this pressure, and Harry goes to the ballpark with a young PR guy by the name of Mario Zeno, who worked for the Brewers for years. And Mario says Harry gets in a car and he's driving out. They're driving from Cross Keys to Memorial Stadium, and what do you? He goes, you look nervous. Why are you nervous? He goes, well, aren't you nervous, Harry? He goes, no, I'm not nervous. We're going to win today. He goes, this is my town. This is a lot of good stuff happened to me in Baltimore. We're fine. And so the confidence that he would have filtered down, and he said by the time he got out of the car, Mario's like, I wasn't nervous. We are going to go in there and win. And went in the locker room. Harry looked at the guys in the locker room and says, hey, thanks for a great season. Today's big. I'm not going to lie to you, but they were loose. He put Bud Selig at ease, and so when they played that game on Sunday, they were loose and they were ready to go, and ultimately it came up their way. And I think that's just kind of the unifying thing. Harry Dalton had a way to put things in perspective for people, that people felt confident that they had done their job. So
yeah, that game they got their ass kicked. I mean, they lost 10-2, and I'm looking that up. Sutton went 8. Palmer started that game, I believe, for the Orioles, right? So
home runs off Palmer, and and things ballooned in about the seventh or eighth inning. The Oriole big gasp was Ben Ogilvy making a sliding catch against the wall in left up against the barricade that sort of thwarted a rally. So,
Dude, this
yep,
is a game I will never bring up when Ken Singleton comes on the show, believe me, or when I run into Al Bunbury over at Robbie's first base. Lee Kluck is our guest. The book is on Harry Dalton, who has an incredible baseball legacy, an incredible Baltimore legacy. Leave while the party's good. Was that always his was that his phrase?
yeah, it was. It was when I was looking for a title. I asked his wife and his daughters. I says, what did Harry always say? What did Dad always say?" And they said, didn't matter what the situation was, if it was a personal situation or if it was a career sort of decision that you were mulling, was like there comes a time, right, when you have to either decide whether you're going to stay or you're going to go, and sometimes it's best to go while things are good. And um, I think Harry did that in Baltimore. He did that at the end of his career when he left Milwaukee, and it was a piece of advice that served him well and also served his family well. So they really enjoyed that title, and I've gotten actually a lot of um, it kind of pulls you in as a reader, so that helps too if you're trying to get people to pick up your book and read it.
Lee Kluck is here. We hope people pick up his book and read it. It is on Harry Dalton. You can find it out on Amazon, anywhere books are sold. Leave While the Party's Good. Lee Kluck, that's Kluck. He's a member of Sabre and a real baseball nerd like Luke Jones, of my favorite people in the world, who educate us and go back and do this research. The life and legacy of baseball executive Harry Dalton. Lee, I appreciate you, man. It's time well spent, even though we did talk about the last weekend of 82. Usually I don't enjoy that too much, but good luck to your Brewers. Hey, how's that Ortiz kid working out? That working out okay with Corbin Burns or no?
It's going to be a trade that actually works out both well for both teams. I'm shocked to have said that. Um, I had somebody affiliated with the Orioles tell me in spring training, they're like, "Hey, Joey Ortiz is a player, and he is. He might very well win the National League MVP or Rookie of the Year if he continues on his way." And Corbin Burns, obviously, Baltimore needed a guy to solidify that rotation, and he's done that. So who knows? Fingers crossed, things shake out, and a couple $300 million payrolls later fall off the table. Maybe we'll have Brewers Orioles in the World Series, but I think it's going to look like a trade that worked out well for both teams.
Well, I'll just say this, man. I'm talking to people's teams here this week. I think we're done fleecing the Brewers, right? I mean, you're not dealing out, you're dealing in. I'm trying to figure out whether we can go fleece the Cubs or the Reds, somebody in your division, take some of their pitching. We need some pitching around here, Lee.
Yeah, it's I'm not gonna lie, the Central is probably ripe for the picking, and that's that, and the reason Milwaukee is on top is I think the rest of the division is middling at best. But they played really well. They could use some more pitching too. So
Well,
yeah,
that's a problem for us. And now everybody's dealing for pitching. I got Cleveland in here this week. Same thing. Everybody needs pitching. That's the state of baseball. But that's the state of baseball when people's arms are falling off. I mean, we have four guys: Bautista, Bradish, Wells. Means never came back. It's crazy what's going on here with this team.
I think the thing that Harry Dalton always told the one adage his daughters always says is Dad always wanted pitching. He didn't care if he had 7 arms, he wanted 8. And so the Frank Robinson trade, and then I'll let you go, Nestor. Thank you for having me on, and I really enjoy Baltimore. The Frank Robinson trade, right? Lee McPhail hands a piece of paper to Harry Dalton, says, "Here's the trade. Call Bill DeWitt, Cincinnati, get the trade done." Harry calls Bill DeWitt and says, "Hey, I'd like this minor league pitcher you've got in Florida. I think he's really going to work out, and I don't want to feel like I got fleeced 3-for-1. So how about you throw this kid in?" And Bill DeWitt looks at him and goes, if you want that pitcher, the deal's done, and it's off. We're done. We're gone." And Lee McPhail looked at Harry and was like, "It's not worth it. Just go." But that was always the kind of thing he tried to do. He tried to get more pitching, and you could never have enough. So, but anyway, thank you, Nestor, and I hope your listeners enjoy the book, and thanks for having a baseball nerd on.
You know what? I'm going to have some more baseball nerds on. John Eisenberg just released these tapes that he did with Harry Dalton. He's got these bird tapes. So I'm going to get John on, talk more about Harry Dalton, more about the Oriole way, because I can't get enough of that. And, you know, I've bragged a little bit about this in the last week or two since Willie Mays died. Luis Aparicio is the oldest living Hall of Famer at this point. So I gotta work while baseball is good in my life again. You know, while we have potential to win, I want to get all the baseball out of me that I've been holding back the last 18 years. Lee Kluck's book is out on the internet on Harry Dalton. Please go check it out. Please check out Luke's work as well. Luke's chasing the baseball team around this week at Baltimore Positive. Football's in a little bit of hiatus here a couple weeks. I'm kind of enjoying that. I'm enjoying the hot dogs and hamburgers and the 4th of July. We rev up the Maryland Crab Cake Tour again on July 12th. And it won't be hard to rev up the Orioles that night. The New York Yankees are back in town before the All-Star break. It's good baseball stuff around here. It's a great summer of baseball. I am Nestor. We are WNST, AM 1570, Taos in Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore Positive.